Hi, this is Andre. I want to talk about using MIDI control for feedback and loop output volume on the Echoplex Digital Pro. Thank you very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this one. We've talked in the past about feedback, and we've done a little bit of comparison between feedback and loop output volume. We're going to go into a little more detail about that. We're also going to talk about using MIDI to control those either continuously or as static commands. So to start with, let me set up a loop. And I have this pedal configured to feedback. I have this pedal configured to output volume. So let's have a listen to both of those. I'm overdubbing right now. That's already a pretty dense texture. So I'm going to bring the feedback pedal down. And you can see as I do that, the front display shows that the value is lowering. Now the old loop content is fading out, and everything is fading out more quickly because I still have the pedal down. Now if I bring the pedal back up to 127, which is the maximum level, now the loop playback is going to be frozen at infinite repeats. And if I bring it back down, it starts fading out a little more gradually. If I bring it all the way down, you only get one repetition. And you can bring that back up. And if you bring it back up to 127, then you're back to infinite repeats. Now, this is in contrast to the loop output volume. At face value, it has a very similar sound. So if I bring this down, you can hear that the volume level is decreasing. There are a couple of really important differences between using feedback and volume. The first is that feedback is a destructive effect. That means that if you bring feedback down, you can hear the loop starts getting quieter. If I bring it back to 100%, I can overdub new stuff on top, and that will be at a regular level. Let me do that really quickly. But bringing feedback back up to 100% doesn't make the old layers that have gotten quieter any louder. On the other hand, if we use volume for that, say I bring it back, I start playing something live on top, bring my guitar volume up, overdub is off, so none of this is being added into the loop. If I bring the volume back up, it hasn't changed the content of the loop. None of the older layers have died away or gotten any quieter. So volume is a non-destructive effect. If I bring the volume all the way down, the loop is still there. That's all the way down. I can play on top. And then when I want to bring the loop back up, I just bring the volume back up. On the other hand, if I'm doing something like that with feedback, if I bring the feedback down, you can hear stuff is fading out. If I bring feedback back up to 100%, there's nothing there because the feedback has gotten rid of the loop layers. To get those old layers that we got rid of with feedback back into the loop, you would have to use undo. Let's see if we can do that. There it comes. So you can undo a feedback-oriented fade in volume content. It is going to be limited by how much memory you have per loop. So right now I have overdub open. I'm going to add some layers on top. Now I'm going to my feedback pedal. I'm going to bring it down about halfway. It's not quite halfway, but you get the idea. And you can hear that the levels are decaying with each repetition. And as we've talked about, if you want to freeze it back at 100%, bring feedback back up to 127. And now we're there. And if we want to build up something new, get rid of those old layers, again, bring feedback down. And that's a pretty quick, pretty dramatic change because I brought feedback down about halfway, and it's also a short loop length. It's only about 1.2 seconds long, so it's pretty easy to get a change. Now, I'm going to switch over to the volume controller, the volume pedal. I'm going to overdub more stuff, and I'm going to bring the volume down, but you're going to get a very different effect. Let's have a listen. So the entire volume of the loop, including the fresh overdubs, is coming down. And if I bring the volume back up, everything that I just overdubbed is still there at full volume. So you're not getting the effect of old layers gradually fading out and new layers being added on top. You're still overdubbing new stuff. So even if I bring the volume all the way down, come on, all the way down. There we go. If I play on top, you're not hearing the change in the loop, but it's still being overdubbed. You know, so right now, because I have overdub open, I'm sorry you can't see the overdub light on the front display. The angle for the camera won't really let me get away with doing that, and showing the front panel numbers and the pedal, so it's my fault. Everything I'm playing right now is being added into the loop, even though we're not hearing the loop. So let's see how bad this all sounds. Not so bad, actually. This is kind of an old school loop technique. You bring the output level of the loop down all the way, you play stuff without hearing what's going on, and then you surprise yourself. And again, to contrast, if I bring the feedback pedal down and then bring it back up, you can hear the older layers are much quieter now, because feedback is affecting how many repetitions you get within a loop. A side effect of that is that it can affect the output volume of the loop if you have it set to an intermediate level and then keep it there. But if we bring it back up to 100%, you can hear that those older layers are very faint. And if we bring feedback all the way down, well, almost all the way down, and then bring it back up, we're just hearing the tail end of that note. And again, just to belabor the point, now I'm going back to the volume level. Oh, sorry about that weird note. Okay, I guess that weird note meant it was time to modulate. If I bring the volume down, and I keep it there at a level of, what's the value, like, okay, 81. The loop isn't really fading out. It's at a reduced volume, but it's not a feedback kind of thing where it's going to get quieter and quieter with each repetition. And you can also hear that as I overdub new live input, when you hear it in the loop, it's a lot quieter because it's being added into the loop at a normal level, and because the output of just the loop is at about 50%. If I bring it back up, everything is at the same level. I'm going to reverse that just for fun. No, not start point. Come on, Andre. There we go. Now I'm going to bring feedback down a little bit, not a ton. And it's fading out gradually. bringing feedback back up to 100% or very close to it. Ah, nice major 7 sound. Now I'm going to bring the volume down slightly. I'm going to leave overdub open. And I'm manually tapering the volume down. But as we talked about, because this was done using the loop output volume rather than feedback, it means that everything I played is still there. And you can bring it back just by increasing the volume of the loop. It's all still there. On the other hand, let's do a similar kind of thing with feedback. Bringing it down. And if I bring it back up to 100%, or close to 100%, then you can hear you're not hearing very much because we used feedback to fade out the level, which is a destructive function. So let's talk about the specific technicality of assigning a MIDI expression pedal to feedback and output volume. If you come down to the second parameter row, MIDI, you can't see it very well because of the camera angle, so sorry about that, but we're on the second parameter row. If you go to volume control, which is under the insert column, then right now it's set to 7. That's a MIDI continuous controller number. In the next column over, the mute column, you have the feedback control. So I have this set up in such a way that MIDI continuous controller 7 is going to regulate volume control. Continuous controller number 1 is going to regulate feedback control. So I have this pedal set to controller 1. I have this pedal set to controller 7. So this is my feedback control, this is my volume control. You could conceivably change it to any continuous controller value that you want to. It doesn't necessarily have to be 1 or 7, that's just what I prefer. It also, depending on your controller, you have a lot of options. So maybe somebody wanted to have this pedal as their volume output and this pedal as their feedback. You could do that as well. It's a question of how you want to have it configured. Let's talk a little bit about this specific controller. It's the Behringer FCB1010. I spent years and years not using these pedals at all. In the last year or so, I found myself trying to force myself to use the pedals just to expand my own comfort zone with the EDP and try and expand my vocabulary as a player and as a looping person. The only real issue I've occasionally had with the Behringer is that sometimes it won't go all the way down if you bring it back, and it won't go all the way up. See right there, it's at 126. Now it's at 127. I did recalibrate the pedal. There's a routine you can go through to recalibrate the expression pedals, which I did right before I started filming this. Generally, it goes to the full value, give or take 1 or 2 steps. This is not necessarily a huge deal. Same kind of behavior with the volume control. Continuous controllers work on a scale of 0 to 127. 0 is 0%. 127 is 100%. So if you have feedback at 100%, you're going to get infinite repetition. Now let me record a very short loop. I'm going to close overdub. Now if I bring feedback, now of course it doesn't want to do it, then I'm trying. Okay, there it is. We're at 126. Now this is a short loop, so if I start overdubbing stuff, even though we're only 1 feedback setting away from maximum, we're at 126 instead of 127. Do we hear that it's getting quieter? A little bit. You know, if I just sit here and let the loop do its thing, it is decaying a little bit. You know, because again, feedback is at 126. That's not ridiculously short, but it's absurdly short, let's say. There you can hear it's fading out relatively quickly. If feedback is all the way to 127, there it is. Now it's not going to fade out. So depending on what you're trying to do, depending on your loop, depending on the application, having it go back to 127 versus 126 may or may not be a big deal. Bringing it all the way down to 1 versus bringing it down to 0 may or may not be a big deal. Let's see, if I record something, if we bring the volume down, so there it's all the way. If I bring it down and it's only at 1, you can still kind of hear it in the background there. So right now I'm not deliberately trying to get it to 1 or 126. I honestly have no idea how much of this is operator error on my part because my technique is not that great with the pedals. I don't know how much of it is the nature of the Behringer pedals. I don't know how much of it is just the fact that I've had this exact pedal board for 12 years and I didn't even start using these pedals, until about a year ago on any kind of regular basis. So it could just be over a decade's worth of wear and tear from throwing this pedal board into my car on the way to and from gigs over the years. So, you know, depending on your application, it may or may not be a big deal. I'm not saying that there's anything fundamentally wrong with the Behringer pedal. This is just the behavior that I have noticed on my exact particular model from time to time. One other thing to talk about is that you can also send static continuous controller commands that are not using expression pedals like this. With an expression pedal, you basically have a continuous range from 0 to 127. But what you can also do for feedback and volume is configure one of these pedals to send a static value. That sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is, as is usually the case with me. So overdub is open. Let me set up a really basic loop. So now I've switched to a different bank, and in this particular bank I have this top row of buttons set to different feedback levels. So if I press button 7, that's going to set feedback to 100. As soon as I pressed it, you can see that the value changed to 100. So this is the equivalent of taking the feedback pedal or the feedback knob, if you were doing it via the front panel, and setting it to exactly 100. And that's not 100%, that's 100 out of a scale of 0 to 127. I will let the mathematically inclined viewers out there figure out what that translates to in terms of a raw percentage. So suffice it to say it's pretty close to 100, but not quite 100. So I have different feedback values set up here. You can't see it on camera, but I have button 6, which sets me at 100% feedback. So right now we have infinite repeats. Button 8 is 70. It's a pretty quick fade out, as you can hear. And button 9 is 40, which is a more rapid fade out. And button 10 is 0 feedback. So you only get the one repetition. Now I just set feedback back to 100 out of 127. So it's fading out, but fairly gradually. Now I'm going to set it to 127. You can't see it because I'm using pedal 6. And I wanted to get these in the camera angle, so it's my fault for not being a great cinematographer. But basically, you can control the feedback value by sending static continuous controller commands. So this button just sends a continuous controller value of 100, and it sends it to controller number 1, which is the controller that I have assigned to control feedback. So this is an alternate way of sending feedback command changes via MIDI, via continuous controller, but not using an expression pedal, just by using these front panel buttons. Honestly, most of the time that I've used feedback in the last decade or so, I've used this kind of thing, because A lot of my style has deliberately been designed to avoid using feedback because I wanted to try and basically not succumb to a lot of what I felt for myself were stylistic conventions and cliches. Having said that, I'm really, really interested in using feedback, and I still consider myself very, very much in the beginner school, especially compared to people like Matthias Grob. So feedback is increasingly interesting to me, and it's something I would like to get better at. So hopefully this video will be a bit of a kick in the pants to get me to work on my feedback chops and conception. Now, you could also configure volume controls in the same way. I've never actually configured loop output volume commands using static values like I have for feedback, but you could conceivably do the same thing. You would just be sending a fixed continuous controller amount, and you would assign the continuous controller number to whatever you have volume configured for on the EDP. So this has been a look at using MIDI control for feedback and volume on the EDP and comparing and contrasting the differences between feedback and volume. How they overlap in some ways, they can get similar types of sounds, but they do very different things. And depending on how you're using them, you can end up getting to very different musical destinations depending on which one of those you're using and how you're using it. Thank you again very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this one, and thank you so much for tuning in. I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye.